existential crisis. And it goes on and on, continuing today. When Baba was in Ceylon in 1932, January, in now Sri Lanka, he was interviewed by a reporter who asked him about his recent world travels. And one of the comments Baba made was this: America, being the most deeply engrossed in material things and suffering the most in consequence, is the soil on which a new spiritual rebirth will first take place. America requires only the guiding hand of a master to redirect its material powers to the heights of spirituality. Sometimes people wonder, do countries have a karma? That therefore, do they have fate and destiny? They don't have karma in the sense that individual souls are subjected to the law of karma, but these groups, that is, cultural, religious, nations, even planets, do have karma, but that is a result of the collective, cumulative karma of all of those individual souls that are connected to these groups that have to continue reincarnating in those groups to resolve their own karmic issues. An interesting book was published 15 years ago titled 1491. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. It's a story of the Americas before Columbus, based on what was then recent scientific evidence. The consensus now is that the population of the Western Hemisphere before Columbus was greater than that population of Europe at the time. 1492 was an interesting year for motion and change. Ferdinand and Isabel got married and decided to expel the remaining Muslim Moors and Sephardic Jews from Spain and begin the Inquisition. And then the Sultan Bayezid the Just welcomed the Jews as well as the Moors into the Ottoman Empire, where they thrived after that. It represented a big change, stirring of the European culture. And of course, Columbus sailed west to discover America, even though different groups of people had been coming to the Western Hemisphere through the centuries. So the Spanish took control of Central and South America, and over the next 30 years, over 7 million people, mostly the native Arawak people of Cuba and Hispaniola, were murdered or died of disease. European pigs were released in Florida. They got loose into Florida and quickly reproduced, and within a few generations became wild again. They're still here, wild. And they carried, naturally, the illnesses that were common in Europe that the indigenous people of the Americas had no immunity to. So it's estimated that over 90% of the Native American population then died of illness before they ever saw a white European. In the 17th century then, the different people from northern European countries began to come to North America, and they established many of their early towns on sites that had been previous settlements of the big Native American populations there that had died out from epidemics. There were farm fields established, and even some buildings were still intact, but mostly they found a lot of skeletons. And it's an interesting thing. It's as if the slate in the Americas was wiped clean and the gate was open for a new chapter. It was a total change. The Puritans came to escape religious persecution from Europe, yet they didn't tolerate people who were much different from them. And in 1692, you recall, the Salem witch trials happened and they hanged a number of people who were convicted of being witches. So over the next 20 years, they had to come to terms with that, and eventually the Massachusetts Bay Colony had to apologize to all of these families for executing innocent people. But this served as a great lesson in the history of America, because the early founding fathers, Ben Franklin, for an example, learned a lot. This was when the days when all you had was the newspapers and debates, public debates. And so this was a topic that was discussed, and it was a major contribution to the constitutional Bill of Rights we have in the United States, separation of church and state, and specifically the First Amendment. And it also was important in some of the other amendments that allowed free and fair trial to anybody accused of anything. But the high idealism of the Declaration of Independence, we hold these rights to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, was overlooked to make a compromise with the southern states to preserve the union of the states, because those southern states had made good commerce out of the slave labor of African people. So this was overlooked. It's ironic that 75 years later, the biggest conflict in American history, the Civil War, was about the same issue. It couldn't be ignored. It eventually had to be dealt with. And in that war, more people died, and there were more casualties in that war than all the other wars that America was involved in through the history of its. Also, at the same time, the Europeans kept coming, expanding westward, and they needed more land. And if the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant majority couldn't tolerate Catholics and Jews, what of the beliefs of the indigenous people? They were considered heathens, and they needed to be saved. So naturally, you had to take the land away from them. So this went on, and by the end of the 19th century, the Native American population had pretty much been pacified. After the Civil War, part of this connecting the continent involved the construction of the Transcontinental Railway. So many laborers were brought from China to do that nearly impossible work of driving the Central Pacific Railway from California eastward into the mountains, across the mountains. Very difficult work. But it wasn't long after that work was completed that the government passed laws preventing further immigration of Chinese people into America to stop the yellow scourge. So this was all the preparation that was going on in the early centuries of America. A few months ago marked the 400th anniversary of the first African slaves into North America. And it's fascinating that this issue of racism is still being dealt with. This is the karma of America. It's still happening. It's not changing. But the difference for us is this. because of Meher Baba, we have a deeper understanding of these issues. Of course, what allows us to catch that understanding is we feel inspired by his love. He's not just another voice, but his explanations have deep meaning. This is not an accident. There is divine purpose. There has been no change so radical in our recorded history as what has happened in the Western Hemisphere in 5 centuries. It's incredible. And that represents a dramatic processing and shifting of sanskaras in all those patterns. America really is a melting pot, no doubt about it. But what is happening is simply this. Suffering continues because of ignorance. That ignorance simply is false identification with the bodies, as Baba explains. So every birth, people are convinced they are that body, that race, from that group, and they act accordingly with self-interest, which creates more binding. And through the law of karma and the necessary reincarnation as a result, they must come back and experience the opposite. So it's ludicrous for anybody who believes in reincarnation to think you're always going to be of the same religion, the same sex, the same country. It's not the way it is. The law of karma is, as Baba says, inexorable in each individual, and it seeks balance. Every time it seeks balance. The problem is very few people in the state of reincarnation can understand that that is what the story is all about. In fact, we are all one, and it's not a question of getting along necessarily by law. All the laws that have been passed to guarantee equality since the Civil War, for an example, have been good intention, but how can they possibly clear the hate from any individual's heart? Can't happen. A law can't do that. We needed redemption. And it's all a setup. Only the Redeemer can redeem. And I like Baba's statement. All must suffer because all must be redeemed. So there is no eternal damnation in all of that. It's not so easy for God. God has to save each individual in a very long, laborious process. Some of you might remember this poster. Rick Chapman put this out over 50 years ago, I think. There, on the back, in the old days where I came from, up in the wilderness, we couldn't get a lot of literature, but we did get these posters eventually and other different things. I got one of these. This was one of the first pieces of literature I got when it just had come out, this pamphlet, you might recall, Compassionate Father pamphlet. But I enjoyed reading these excerpts on the back of this poster. I want to read these two. This is an excerpt from Baba's message at the dedication of the Universal Spiritual Center in Mangala in December of 1939. The thing about Baba's messages is they are, to me, relevant to the whole age. It's not, unless you understand the context of it. When he gave messages, they were generally addressed to the age and not to a group in a few years' time. They were really relevant to the age itself. Exclusiveness is parading as nationalism. Self-interest is known as economics. Fanaticism is synonymous with religion. Libertinism is looked upon as social and moral freedom, and exploitation is termed politics. This instinct of self-preservation is legitimate and natural in the lower order of life in the scale of evolution, but when it expresses itself through man, it makes of him nothing more than a talking animal. In the divine scheme, when individuals or peoples, instead of progressing higher, are about to lapse into bestiality, it is suffering that rehabilitates them. And another, the present chaos and destruction will engulf the whole world, but this will be followed by a very long period in which there shall be no war. The passing sufferings and miseries of our times will be worth enduring for the sake of the long period of happiness which is to follow. What will the present chaos lead to? How will it all end? It can end only in one way. Mankind will be sick of it all. Man will be sick of wanting and sick of fighting out of hatred. Greed and hatred will reach such intensity that everyone will become weary of them. The way out of the deadlock will be found through selflessness. The only alternative which will bring a solution will be to stop hating and to love, to stop wanting and to give, to stop dominating and to serve. I can go on with something, or we can now begin with questions.
It's up to you.
Okay. If anybody has any questions.
There is a digital way to raise your hand if you have a question. The quick summary is on a computer, on a PC, it's Alt and Y, the Alt Y buttons, both at the same time, once. On a Mac, it's Option Y. And on a smartphone or a tablet, it's going to be under the More button. And you can raise hand there. Larry has his hand up. Go ahead.
Hey, Peter.
Hello, Larry.
Yes, brother. So this message, this pithy, deep, relevant message that was presented back in the 30s is so apropos for today.
Yes.
Painfully so, if you, or in an excited way, perhaps too. But of course, Baba, who knows the future, even if it's years and ages and ages hence, it's intriguing and interesting to say the least. I would like you to comment, please, on the absolute relevance of that comment given back at that time to reflect the present state of affairs in this crazy world we're living in now.
Yes. As I say, Baba's messages were generally relevant to the age because the conditions that we experience in this age are a result of sanskaric patterns that are present and last a long time. And they don't disappear except through the help of the perfect master, specifically the avatar, who makes adjustments whenever he comes and makes great effort to push humanity forward. You know all how Baba laid so much emphasis on the importance of this particular Advent and the work he had to do like no other. It was such an important Advent. His silence to me had to be, it was inevitable. An inevitable effort in this age of noise was the avatar, the archetypal perfect human being creating a counter effect to the noise, the unnatural noise of this age. Yes, it's going to go on a long time. Bob had said from the beginning of his advent, Baba made a lot of comments about war. He talked about another great world war even before he started his silence. As a matter of fact, on that evening before he began silence, July 9th at Mehrabad, sitting on the veranda of the post office then, he was addressing the Mandali, and some of the women, older women, were there, including Adi's mother, Gulmai, who was sitting next to Baba. You remember Baba referred to her as his spiritual mother. Padre was there, and he would tell us of what he observed also as Baba was giving them that message, that last message while he was still speaking. Baba said, there will be the world will be filled with wars, and there will be rivers of blood. He used to wear that kerchief. Okay, you see this photograph behind me. That's taken January 11th, 1927, but Baba used to wear that on his head. And that night, before he started silence, he referred to that. He said, there will be wars everywhere, and there will be rivers of blood. I will take my kerchief and dip it into that river of blood and tie it. And at the same time, during that time, he told them, and Mara thought Baba looked so delicate and polite then, and he suddenly made this comment, I will unsheath my sword, and humanity will know it, something like this. Years went by. Every once in a while there would be some event. While Baba was on the hill doing that 5.5 months fast and seclusion in his crypt cabin early in 1928, when he was raising all the Prem Ashram boys in consciousness, one day he stayed alone without an attendant near him in the cabin, and then the very next morning 12 soldiers showed up at Mehrabad and expressed a desire to have Baba's darshan. So they came up the hill, and the first thing they did was all get in a line and salute Baba. Then he gave them darshan, and he sent Jal down the hill to close the school and tell everybody to come up. And then he gave this message about what had happened the previous night. The reason he had stayed alone is because he said he had a message with the spiritual hierarchy. It was about the planning for the coming war. He said that's why the soldiers came in the morning. And he said this work represents the most important beginning of my advent, the work to prepare for the war. As we know, the war went on and on. Baba made those trips to Europe in the 30s, especially that last long trip in 1937 of over 80 days in France was specifically for the war preparation. When he brought Muhammad the Must, he had Baidul and Adi Sr. bring Muhammad to France. And remember that Baba said that in his work during World War II, Muhammad represented Germany. And he brought Muhammad the Must to France during that period. This was all preparation. When he returned back to India, the work to improve the Meher retreat ashram on the hill for the women happened immediately that next year, 1938. Because before the war really got underway, Baba wanted to bring a lot of the Western women to live together with the Eastern women on the hill. And he had specified particular groups that should stay together and be totally isolated from other groups. And he would even have these bamboo panel partitions put up between these groups, and there were only two people who were allowed to be the intermediaries between these groups to communicate. One was Kitty Davy. Every once in a while, he would readjust the groups and make a change, but it continued like that for years. Through the war years, it continued like that. And all those seclusions he did on Mehrabad Hill were all during the wartime. Then all the must work that happened, the must work was primarily done during the war. And Erich used to say it was ironic, they would read the signs in the Indian railway system then that were in every rail station. The sign was, "Travel only if you must." And here they were hunting musts. So much of that work was done then. And we have stories, actually, of specific musts that were obviously engaged in some specific spiritual task that Bob had assigned to them regarding the war. Erich went to contact one must. Bob had ordered him to contact a violent Jalali must who lived alone in the jungle somewhere. And of course, they knew what Baba would expect from them to make these contacts. But Erich said he got slapped a few times by this must for getting too close, asking questions. But one question he did ask, he saw all these mud balls on a plank there. And he asked the must, "Why do you have these mud balls on this plank?" "Those are not mud balls. Those are balls of fire that God has ordained me to throw down upon humanity." Nair said every once in a while he'd pick one of these mud balls up and fling it in some direction. Don't know. No, these are, this history of Baba is largely ignored. People can't make sense of it now. It's too much. It's only for a few people right now. The change has to be made. The awakening of humanity is a process of patience for him. And what we're going through now, I refer to as a period of compassionate preparation. As Baba has said, he suffers for the very humanity that ignores and humiliates him. And he does it very patiently. So World War II happened, and many of these messages were given out during World War II. And if you read those messages carefully in context of Baba's whole life's mission, you can see that he's not just talking about a period of a few years where World War II occurred. He's talking about an extended period, and he mentions that often, that there would be a worse period after this initial war in the future. That would be much worse. So World War II happened, but within a few days after the final surrender by the Japanese, Baba made the comment, it wasn't enough. And in November of 1945, you'll recall that he went to Angiris Rishi Hill in central India, Raipur area, where Jalkarawala was stationed, to do that seclusion there. And Adi Sr. told us when he came out of that seclusion, Baba, this would be in effect, when Baba was doing intense seclusion work sometimes, his hair would be like as if he had run a balloon over his hair with static electricity everywhere, and his hair would be standing up like this. And Adi said he came out of that seclusion. His hair was like that. He was perspiring. And that was the first time Baba dictated on the board, 3/4 of the world must be destroyed. A few years later, Baba mentioned it again. And he didn't say 3/4 of the world and it means this and it means that. He said, almost casually, 3/4 of the population will have to die. at some point. Okay, as we approach 8 billion and maybe it gets to 9 billion, 3/4 of that, it will be billions of people, billions of people. What we're seeing now is nothing. This is just a little wake-up call in the world now. These little issues, it's just Baba giving us a heads up. It doesn't, frankly, we're Baba lovers. It's just a step forward for us. I'm fine either way. That's the way I look at it. Manifestation, fine, Baba. You say it has to happen, fine. If it was just like this, we have ours. What can we say? That might be selfish, but on the other hand, you cannot give this to people. It's not our business. It's his business to give any individual love. We can't do it. We can't do it. So, as Baba's work went on, the new life happened specifically then. That was a great chapter in Baba's life's work. And that had to do with him becoming the perfect seeker on behalf of all of humanity, to reblaze the spiritual path. And since he was the original spiritual pathfinder, as the original ancient soul, he has taken the eternal responsibility for creation. Only he could do that. When that work was completed, the solution was Manunash, annihilation of the mind. And he brought that to America. With his first trip to the center in 1952. And remember, on the issue of racism, everybody knows that when Baba first came in the 50s, whenever black people would come into the room, he would stand up and greet them. Something different. He would use the colored toilets facilities in the South. This is how he affects change. Then the car crash in Oklahoma. What a thing. America doesn't know what happened. And that he allowed Mara to suffer. So America will have to pay the price. It's not like winning a lottery ticket. He focused on America for a reason, because he uses Maya to defeat Maya. But the price will be paid. I mean, Baba made other statements, but I don't like to say these things because they're sensational. You know, many things have not been published, especially in the age of the Mandali, which is over now. But they stayed away from sensationalism. And as I say to people, because you can tell people 100 things about Meher Baba, and if one thing is sensational, they'll only remember that one thing. And they won't remember the other 99 things. So there were other incidents. It's not the right time to talk about these things yet, I would say. War and things like that. But any other questions?
Yes, Max Reef had his hand up.
Right. Okay, you unmuted me. Okay. Hi, Peter. Jay Baba.
Hi, Max.
I came in a little bit late, but I got the drift. So if you covered this already, forgive me. But I've been thinking a lot about this process whereby none of us is really any particular race. Like I have family members, for example, who are really into family history. And I'm not able to tell them, I don't think I'm just part of this family, you know. And everybody know, and many of us have heard the story. I think it was Beryl Williams that asked Baba, why did I have to be born black? And he told her, it may have been, somebody told me recently, he told her she had been a mean slave, a cruel slave owner, and she had to be born black to experience the other side. So I ascertained that's the process that really goes on in life.
Right. Right.
My question is there any idea how many times a person has to go through this before they start to get it?
Yes, absolutely.
And then-
8,400,000 times.
Okay. Okay. And then, let me ask one more little thing that came up while you were just talking. Because you spoke about the literal interpretation of Baba saying 3/4 of the population would be destroyed of the world. And then he issued his clarification. I haven't brushed up on this for a while, but then he said that was said in my language only. So do you have anything to say about what he might have meant by that?
Okay, well, since you brought up the subject, the four messages are really crucial. And that's as part of the, really, they are the central features of this story of Baba's work and the addressing his manifestation. It begins, of course, after the new life, there was the free life, the fiery free life where he traveled around. And the last really major darshan of the fiery free life happened at Wadia Park in Ahmednagar on September 12th, when it was the first day that the men from the West had arrived for the 3 incredible weeks. So they got to observe that, those hundreds of thousands of people who were there, having Baba's darshan. The end of that month was the final declaration address at Mehrabad. And in that final declaration, to me, I think it's one of the great messages from Baba, but it has been largely ignored because people felt uneasy about Baba's declaration of destruction of 3/4 of the world, when he said, the time has come for the preordained destruction of 3/4 of the world. Of course, this is just a reiteration of his previous work. Time doesn't mean that year, although he would say he would drop his body by April of 1955. Then in the address before the final declaration at Mehrabad, about 1,000 men were there. So there was what was typical in Baba's work. He created a mental atmosphere. And in the world of his lovers, there was panic, there was sadness, there was excitement, there was this courageous enthusiasm. All of these features were there mentally in each of the individuals for 40 days until he issued his clarification. And in that clarification, he said, I said this in my language, and this in your language, and this is in both languages. But you can't really understand what my language is until after it happens, and then you'll get the gist of it. So then there was a period of, okay, Baba's just toying with our emotions. That went on until February, when he issued his confirmation to the final declaration, which was essentially, don't think that everything I said was just bullshit. I'm God. Whatever I said is true. It will happen. You just don't understand how. He said, but now the issue at hand is simply this. I must decide by April whether I should keep the full impact of what was destined to be the spiritual impact, catharsis, or whether I should, and extend the time element, or whether I should temper the impact so that humanity could tolerate it. So the months went on, and in April of 1955, he gave that message, the final decision. And in that final decision, he said, I have decided to extend the time element because it is important that the world, that humanity should feel the full impact of the work for the spiritual upliftment. They must experience it all. But in order that they should tolerate that, I have decided to extend the time element so that gradually, bit by bit, it will be more easily accepted and absorbed by them. So that shows us that after 1955, we can say that time elements have been extended, and all these prophecies that were made before then, they don't fit time anymore. And yes, things we may have expected to change by now have not yet changed. But it's happening. And within the next 50 years, I'll say that we will see definite radical. We may not see it. The next generation will see it for sure. It'll happen. And really speaking, nature has not begun to rebel yet. Baba said most of the destruction would be from natural causes. Oftentimes, natural causes is a reaction to man-made causes. So yes, those four messages are very relevant. They have to do with the manifestation. And you remember after those four messages, Baba got onto this thing about the black cloud. And he mentioned first in the final declaration, you'll see this thing where he talks about in quick succession, my suffering and humiliation, the breaking of my silence, my glorification, my violent physical end is in there somewhere, and my manifestation. So this goes on for some years. And when Baba dropped his body, people were puzzled because he had said this thing about the black cloud and the sequence of these things. Or what happens, though, is that the avatar accomplishes, as he said, all of his work during his physical lifetime. It doesn't fit our paradigm of time. That's the problem. We want to think of things in this time paradigm as real, and it's not. It's not real. In infinity, there is no time. There is one eternal moment. All of this from infinity inward down the planes, infinity outward down the planes, I should say, is in a different time paradigm. So two interesting things. One is that Baba used to say that he would live to the age of 90, and it's one of the reasons that the Mandali didn't think he was going to drop his body in 1969. Because he had said that. He would be there till he was 90 at least. But what they thought was maybe Baba only dropped his physical body. Not they, I won't say they, but some people. And the proof of that was somebody like Muhammad the Must, whose comment after Baba dropped the body was, "What? Baba's here. Baba's everywhere now. Can't you see him? He's here. He's there. He's here. He's everywhere." That was his view from the fifth plane. Okay. Don't know. What can we say? It's just conjecture for us, for ordinary consciousness. But it's an interesting thing. Interesting thing. So if that's the case, when did he drop the subtle mental body? We don't know. Part of his work. Any other questions?
Yes, Tina had her hand up.
Hi, Peter. So what specifically do you think is going on in this moment in the world with the virus and the demonstration of Baba's will?
Yes. As I say, this is only a little thing, but Uh, People are prompted to act because they feel this urge for truth. It's gradually happening step by step. If you recall, I can say all of us I see here, when we were younger, society, culture was much less expressive, much more emotionally repressed than we are now. I personally will say this. I observed this. When I was young, I never saw people embracing each other, doing all of this kind of a thing. People were generally at arm's length. If you embrace somebody, maybe people would be homophobic or something, you know, it was some reaction. We brought embracing as a habit from the Meher Center. That habit began there because of Baba himself. You see it in the 56 film when he's wandering around Delmonico's, embracing people occasionally. Even then, they're very stiff. They don't know if they should react or were they told to sit down and shut up? What? God knows what. Only you see Ben Heyman, he's like in his own world. He gives Bob a hug, but you know, generally you don't see people reacting. But in our, let's say in the hippie era, it was very common. Everybody was embracing. We brought it back to our little town in the way in the north, and you know, I see people embracing there now. I know they didn't have that. Where did it come from? It came from Meher Baba through us. I see that all over the country and the world. And I think, I'm convinced it came from Baba. That's just an example of how this is gradually happening and people are expressing themselves. But people have this urge for honesty, for the truth now. But how can you get that? It's only going to be aroused in any individual if you have an iconic figure who represents the untruth as a leader, who provokes people to express the truth, who provokes people who get so agitated internally they must express the truth. So this leader is playing a very important role, not the one he thinks, but the one that is in fact determined by the divine plan. It takes many, many lifetimes to produce a character that is to the point, what would you call it, sociopathic, to the point where you'll do things that persons with a conscience would never think of doing. But they play a very important role to provoke a response as a catalyst for catharsis. It's a very rare role that not many people can play. It takes lifetimes to set up any individual to be like that. The manipulation of their fate, of their karma, to create that reaction. It's a long time, and they play a very important role. These world leaders are nothing but puppets, as Baba said, puppets in the hands of the perfect masters. They just play a role in the divine plan. There are many people, you know, like people who are greedy and have insidiously, very cleverly found ways to extract profit from humanity en masse with little or no effort. They think they're getting billions without effort, but they're taking billions of sanskaras from people en masse. That's what they're taking. These people just collect sanskaras. There's been this question through the years. Baba made some comments after World War II. This is what Padre told me personally. These things aren't published, I don't believe, but you know, many of Hitler's generals were executed. They were hanged. And Baba said many of them were liberated. Padre explained it to me this way. He said, Baba explained it to them. He said, these people collect sanskaras from millions upon millions. By doing what they do, they collect many sanskaras. And when the perfect master sees them, it is like a ripe fruit hanging from the tree that cannot be resisted. They must be plucked and harvested by that perfect master. Because the difference between the perfect masters and the saints is the perfect masters make sanskaras disappear. The saints can rearrange them and make this go here and that, but they can't obliterate sanskaras. When the perfect master liberates someone, those sanskaras are gone. So all the sanskaras they have collected are gone. So all the people who have been freed of impressions by these so-called scoundrels, it's gone. It doesn't like go back in the mess again and kind of like get swirled around and in some other lifetime you drink it again. No, it's gone. It's gone. But in order to play the role of one of those scoundrels, Baba said, it takes lifetimes of too many good sanskaras. They have to have many lifetimes of an overabundance of good sanskaras to ultimately play the role of the bad guy. This is not for the Gearing and the Goebbels who committed suicide with their families, I don't believe, but the ones who went bravely to their execution. The pandemic, this is just, as I say, this is just a wake-up call. It's interesting to me that people who put so much emphasis on the social life have taken this as an affront to their freedom. Especially if you're a Baba lover, what is this? Is not freedom anyway. This has nothing to do with freedom. Read Baba's discourse, Work for the Spiritual Freedom of Humanity, where he describes what real freedom is. These things are inevitable because of the natural sanskaras that are prevalent in this age. And as the population grows and grows, these things will become exacerbated. An increase in population really will aggravate these natural effects much more, and we'll have a lot more of these kind of things happening. Well, it's interesting to me that Baba is, for an example, we say Baba because Baba is eternal, and he's the one who is eternally responsible. Though he has dropped his body, and he said his work is officially over when he drops his body, but it gets continued by others, being specifically the others who continue doing his work are the spiritual hierarchy of that perfect age, in point, the five perfect masters of that age that continue executing the divine plan that he has established during his physical lifetime. That is what is happening. But it is interesting to me that people who are religious feel it to be such an affront. It is so deeply drilled into their heads that they're going to hell if they don't go to church on Sunday. That they just can't, they have to do it. They have to go to a church on Sunday. Some people are getting to the point, though, in that and saying, wait, is my link with God broken because I didn't go to church because of a virus? How could that be? Is that what God is? So these things are making people a little more introspective, examining what your relationship is. Do I need to pray out loud with a group doing this and looking at each other so we are convinced that we're doing the right thing here? No. I mean, read Matthew 6 if you're a Christian. That's not what prayer is anyway. So all of these things are making people dig deeper into what is essentially really important, I believe. Next question, please.
Yes, Gopal had his hand up. Gopal, you here? He may have stepped away from the computer. There you are. Good.
No, I'm sorry, Angela. Probably that was by mistake. But
All right.
thank you. Yeah, thank you. Mhm.
And in the chat box, Matt Kelly had a question. I guess I could read it for you.
Okay.
J Baba, Pete, and Debbie, thank you for this time with you. If a group's karma is not spent, how can an individual who is part of that group be released from the group, especially Baba lovers?
As a Baba lover, you don't need to worry about being in groups at all, because if you're with Baba, that is the thing that supersedes all other things. That connection supersedes all other connections. But that being said, Baba uses his lovers and their inner links with others to make connections for these people. This is how everyone eventually comes into contact. It has to be indirect at first. So many Baba lovers have been living alone, lonely in some obscure place, feeling isolated. But Baba had placed them there and is using their inner links to give other people at least an indirect connection. This is how it happens, and we can't say I have the same advice for anybody at any time. Just breathe Baba's name. You just breathe his name. What more can we do? And, of course, follow the path of right action and right inaction. All of these things has been prescribed by Baba. It's not, we just have to maintain our link. He said, maintain that link with me through obedience, making an effort. That's it. Next question.
Yes, Jack, you had a question.
Yeah, Peter, Jack Burke here.
Jack,
Hi, Jack.
Oh, we got a problem here, but
put your headphones on.
Eric's experience in Arizona.
Put your headphones on, Jack.
Did you catch that?
Okay. Was there a question? Are we listening to Jimi Hendrix?
Yeah. No. What's your take on Shelley Merrick's experience in Marizard back in 2016?
I think you're referring to when she said she saw Donald Trump come out of Baba's room there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, as I say, I believe his role is as a catalyst for catharsis. I don't believe he's consciously aware of his role. If he is, he's doing a damn good job hiding it. But yeah, he's playing a specific role that has been given to him, assigned to him in the divine plan. There's no mistake. These aren't mistakes. It is for a specific purpose, to cause this catharsis, to cause people to dig deep within. Maybe for some to say, hey, am I like that? I hope not. Maybe, I don't know. And it is what it is. Everybody has their own impressions. They are where they are. I would be the last person to say this person should change and that person should change. They are as they are. And as Baba explained, this is the result of millions of lifetimes. We can't point a finger at people and tell them they should act a specific way. But when it comes to living with Baba for Baba, there are a few little things we have to do. But these people are not dedicated to Baba, so we can't expect any change from them. When you're a Baba lover, you can't ignore what Baba has advised. It's not only a gift, it is a responsibility to follow Meher Baba. It's different. Yeah, it is obvious. It is obvious that, I mean, it's a miracle that this man was elected president, but there he is. It's meant to be. There's a purpose behind it. It is meant to be. See, he's not. Hitler, for an example, was a psychopath. But Baba wanted him. He said he played his role perfectly. But Hitler believed, he had conviction in what he was doing. He believed it was the right thing. And he led this war activity in the world that resolved so many old karmic debts. Donald Trump is not psychopathic, I don't believe. Sociopathic, different. He may do anything at any time that he perceives as of best benefit to himself. It's different. Different. Okay. Anyway, next question.
I don't have any other hands up, so
Okay.
if
Yes.
there are, oh, there's a couple of hands up. All right, Judy, go ahead. Robertson.
Hi, Peter.
Hi, Judy.
There. I've got a couple of Baba history questions for
Yes.
you that are off today's subject, which is
Fine.
really-
Anything you like.
what happened to Rustam, Irani? Rustam K.
Yes.
Irani.
What happened to Rustam? You know the history. He was one of the prominent early disciples of Baba. He was really Baba's PR man, greatly respected by all of the Mandali. Natural charisma, great personality. But he had a link to the world. He is the one that Baba sent to England in 1928 to make the first contact with the Western world. He was prominent in the early days of Meher, that is the 20s, as the manager. And in 1929, then, he went to Nasik and established Sarosh Motor Works in Nasik and eventually Sarosh Cinema there. Many of the Mandali were employed during those difficult depression years at those businesses, as well as some of the Prem Ashram boys. This is now after the age of the Prem Ashram. Rustam was also the first person who spoke to Baba about motion pictures. And Baba was enthusiastic about it and encouraged him to continue investigating that. This is how the motion picture work was first introduced to Baba. And naturally, when he went to the West, specifically in 1932, and he went to Hollywood, and so many of those people in Hollywood met him, that work progressed, at least in a planning stage. And at Meher in 1934, those scripts or themes were developed, where some of the people who were involved in the motion picture industry worked with Baba to develop into screenplays with themes of spirituality. Rustam continued his business and did well. He eventually made his own motion picture. It's not very good. He tried, it was kind of a theme in which he starred. And there was an actress there that he kind of had a crush on, I believe. And he built a house for her in Nasik even. The filming was done in the Nasik area. In the meantime, his wife, Mara's sister, Franny, was becoming emotionally agitated because she had to stay home with the children and she wanted to be with Baba. And Baba wanted her to be with the children. This is Meru and her sister and brothers. They were all little kids then. And the time went on, and eventually Franny became a bit more imbalanced. Rustam became more dejected. He lost money also. And in the end, he wandered away as a fakir. And of course, he couldn't just go away and just say, I'm just fed up and I'm leaving. He had to dress in the costume and take a few photographs of himself as the fakir wandering away. And it was odd, but this was by 1940, he was gone then. He left. Munir Barucha told me a story. I believe it was during the New Life meetings time. He was there at Mehrabad for that time also, for some of those. And Rustam's sons came in, and they had turned against Baba because they would also have this whispering in the ear of some of the other family members, extended family members, who were adamantly opposed to Baba. So they came to Mehrabad. Baba had been like the uncle to them. He, to these children who grew up in Baba's atmosphere, they took him as like the uncle. He was always there. They kind of took him for granted. He just took care of everything, and but because of what they had heard, not all the brothers, they were, a couple who were more fiery than the, especially Melu was the most adamant, the eldest. He was most adamantly opposed to Baba. And they came to see Baba and shouted some accusations and all that. At the time, Meenu said, Baba told Vishnu bring a letter. Vishnu brought a letter written by Rustam to Baba explaining why he was going away. And that letter was shown to the brothers, the sons of Rustam, which made them keep quiet. And they realized that he had done this of his own accord. And there was no blame to Baba about it. And he was not ordered to ever do such a thing, of course. He did this of his own accord. One day in the 50s, Adi said, Baba looked at him once and then gestured, Rustam is no more. Rustam is no more. And that was the end of the story of Rustam. But when Bob explained the circle in the 20s, he explained, Bob was doing, in the very early years, Baba did a lot of his circle work. Most of his circle work was done during those early years. And part of that was giving discourses on the function of the circle and different. And at that time, he said, one of the 12 goes away. And it always struck me that most likely that he was referring to Rustam, who would go away. Don't know. But he was a great personality and important, very important, respected by all the other Mandali in the early days. It's just that he had this link to the world that Baba used. He contributed to Baba's work by having this link to the world. Yeah, that's what happened with Rustam.
Peter, Peter, what year was that he went away?
1939, and then by 40, I can't recall the last time they had seen him in Nasic, but those pictures of him were taken then.
What year was it said that he's no more?
Sometime in the 50s, Adi said.
And my second question that I wanted to ask was about Audie Jr.
Yes.
What year did Baba basically send him to England, and what were the circumstances around Baba asking him or telling him to go to England?
Well, Adi Jr. was in business. He was one of the early disciples, one of the Mandli, Baba's brother, but he was also in business. He had a family now. His first wife died giving birth to Dara in 1944. And then he got married to Franny, his second wife, who was also her fam. She was the first cousin of Goer and Katie, as you know. And then they had Shireen. By that time, Fred Marx, who was running an antiques business in England, there was correspondence, and Adi had that opportunity also. It was easier to make a living in London than it was in Ahmednagar, essentially. That's where he ended up. Yes, I see Jeff is raising his hand.
It's very hard for me to find someone with
Jeff Asbell, raising his hand.
All right. There are other people whose hands are up digitally. Jeff, you do recall how to do that. You've come to Effort and Grace, but I will find you and unmute you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, Peter.
Hi, Jeff.
Thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Peter, I have a question about the various wars that you spoke about, but I can't think of anybody that would know more about this question. And I've asked it once before here in a meeting maybe a month ago. Could you talk about what Baba said regarding there were 4 million Christians and 6 million Jews that Hitler murdered? Could you give us some insight in a really in-depth way about whatever you understand and remember what beloved Baba said about that particular war? So many people died in such brutal ways.
Yes. Well, as I say, Baba was focusing on this war, which he said would be a primary importance in the beginning of the work, the manifestation of his work for this Advent. It had to do with balancing and clearing impressions, old karmic patterns being resolved, ancient things. And again, this goes back to beyond identifying with race, country, religion. Every time something happens like this, okay, let's say Attila the Hun raids Europe, and people pray, God, is there no God? How could this happen? Millions are being tortured and killed. How could it be? And then Genghis Khan comes through, and all of those people who were in Attila the Hun's army are praying, God, why are we suffering? How could this be? We're being killed and murdered. Is there no God? And then time goes on, and these karmic patterns must be resolved. These people take birth in just the right place to die, to suffer and die in just the right circumstances to get a great boost. So for an example, when Baba was in Bangalore in 1939, 2 Parsi men came to speak to him. They had heard of Mayor Baba. They're from Bombay, and they were also worldly wise people. And they asked him, "What is your advice? How can we avoid this coming world conflagration? It seems so inevitable now. Is there any chance we can avoid this?" And Baba's answer was, "I don't want to avoid this. It's been inevitable. It shall happen. We've been working towards this for years. It is essential. And there will be so many dead that there won't even be time to bury the bodies." We saw that. We saw that when the camps were opened up and all the dead were there and they were just buried en masse, big mass graves. How could this be? And Baba made a comment that is not published, and I'll tell you frankly today what it was. Baba said, now people, during the height of this war, people are saying, how unfortunate, the millions of innocents dying needlessly. He said, but I know they're not so innocent. They have to pay a price. It's the only way. He said, but the people who suffer and die in this horrible conflagration will be the beneficiaries of the great period of peace and prosperity which will happen in the future, because they will have been gleaned. And Eretz used to say that he felt most of the Western Bible lovers were people who had died in World War II. Yes, further. Jeff.
Was very close to Baba, that Baba brought him up to the seventh plane. But here's the real question I want to say in less than 30 seconds. I understand a story was told to me that Sri Aurobindo saw what was happening in the camps and the tremendous slaughter of people you've spoken about. And he disguised himself as the demonic Teutonic spirit that was entering Hitler's mind, and that Sri Aurobindo, disguised as that demonic Teutonic spirit, went into Hitler's mind and told him to go after Russia, the next country, knowing that the Russians would defeat Hitler. Is there any truth to that as far as you know? The reason I ask the question is I just like to know, and there's Sri Aurobindo doing something that he just saw such tremendous suffering, I understand, is why he did that. Can you offer any kind of insight about that kind of situation, if it actually happened at all?
Well, this sounds like conversations that we used to have in the original kitchen, but I've never heard Baba say anything like this, and he would be the authority to say something like that. Where that kind of information comes from, I can't say. So I wouldn't give any credence to that if I didn't hear that Baba had said it. What I can tell you about Aurobindo is this much. Of course, Baba referred to him as a political saint. He was politically involved in India before he became illumined. But here's an important feature of the mental world. Baba gave this explanation, and it's quite interesting. As a side to this, Aurobindo was mentioned as one of the people who may join the New Life companions in the future. He may join the New Life. Okay, a year after that, Aurobindo dropped his body, and Baba was listening to the radio that whole time when Aurobindo dropped his body. And Baba liberated him, so he got eternal life. He was realized or liberated, at least. He got eternal life. He joined the New Life in that way. But after Gandhi was assassinated, Aurobindo made some statements about Gandhi's greatness, and he was something avatar and something, and Baba said, Baba's comment was, it was a ludicrous thing that this political saint would say such things. And he doesn't really have that experience to say such things. And then he said this, he said, because Chatti Baba was also dying around the same, dropping his body around the same time. 1947, 48, this was. And he said, yes, Aurobindo experiences the sixth plane through the effort of meditation. But it is an objective experience that he doesn't experience continuously. It's in his meditation that he enters that condition. He said, one like Chatti Baba is different. He's the king of his sixth plane. He experiences that world without a break because he has earned it through love of God, forgetting himself, and not through effort and meditation. So Baba explained the difference of the reason Baba didn't give great importance to Aurobindo's literature, for an example, is because it's an honest outline of Aurobindo's path. But he said Aurobindo's path was very atypical, almost anomalous, because he traveled that far through ages without having a master, through his own personal effort. And he happened to end up then at that time. Okay. I'm getting a message I should let other people ask questions.
Betty has her hand up.
This is kind of it's a historical question. It's kind of on behalf of my friend Barbara Roberts, who did considerable research on a Catholic priest in Colorado named Joseph Oldenburg.
Yes.
Who corresponded with Baba, who had
Right.
wrote many. Oh, you do know about him.
Oh, yes.
And I think maybe it was Barbara's speculation that the question is, how did he find out about Bob? This
Yes.
is before.
Yes,
Yeah.
Barbara and I have had a few
Oh.
good conversations about Joseph Oldenburg. The first Baba lover in America who was a Catholic priest, who was ordained in Rockford, Illinois, where my wife is from. Interesting. Never met Baba and somehow lost contact with Baba in his later years. He did go to India in 1935, at least to Bombay. And of course, if he innocently got off the boat in Bombay and went to his local Catholic friends and said, I want to meet Mayor Baba, he's the Messiah, what do you think would have happened? On the other hand, when he traveled to India in 1935, Baba was doing the seclusion work at Mount Abu and then at Mehrabad, so odds are he wouldn't have had an opportunity to meet Baba anyway. But at least the connection was lost. But through those early letters to Baba, we can see that he had connection of a Parsi person, a Zoroastrian, a Parsi person from India, because of the language he uses, the word Bawaji. Bawaji is a Gujarati Parsi term, which means respected elder, like that, dear respected elder. It's not used by other Indian groups. He heard darshan, he writes darsans, something like that. Our best guess is that Padri's brother Rustam, who was studying at the Colorado School of Mines at the time, may have met him at some religious conference, something there in Colorado. And this is how Joseph Oldenburg heard of Meher Baba. We have letters from him after 1926. We don't have anything from 26 and before, because when Baba disbanded the ashram at Mehrabad at the end of the first long stay in November 1926, he had all the correspondence burned. How we would have loved to have looked at some of that stuff, but Baba had it all burned. Next question.
I'd just like to point out that it is 3 minutes to noon. Peter, if you're getting tired, you just let us know. but
I'm not getting tired. I'll go on as long as anybody wants to. I don't mind.
we don't have anything else planned on the schedule till 1:30. So if people don't mind, we will keep going.
Okay.
There was a question in chat from Telly.
Okay.
Would Peter talk about what he knows about the meaning of the 10 circles chart? Is there a known explanation or is it still a mystery?
Okay. Of course, the chart isn't a total mystery. It was done by Rano. She started in the Gnostic years and finished it in the 40s at Mehrabad. And it is kept in the Mehrabad Museum now. It is 5 feet wide by 8 feet tall. And certain aspects of the chart are obvious and are relevant to every Advent, and certain aspects of the chart are only relevant to this age. Those would be the figures and different things. Baba did not give explanations to Rano about all these details. And as she says, he even was particular about minutely adjusting colors on some of the things. We know through research that certain, let's say, if the buildings are monuments in India of certain places and other things that are involved, and those are relevant to the present age. The means of transportation from bullock cart, bicycle, to steamship and airplane are relevant to that particular advent of the avatar. Some of the other things are very fascinating. The murals at the top that you don't see much of may eventually be really developed by somebody who's a genius in video stuff because they scream out to be 3D. Some of these murals are fascinating, and how many figures of the bulls around one and how it is kaleidoscopic in nature. And another fascinating one of a figure that looks like Baba in a kind of a jungle setting with two figures that look remarkably like Mara and Mani. And while there are half-human creatures hanging in the tree with tails, it's fascinating, that kind of stuff. That screams ancient times, something. The ancient one in ancient times, unrecorded history. There are the divine theme charts that had just been done by Rano for the 1943 divine theme meeting at Mehrabad. Those are also included in the top of the charts, and they were like some of the final features of that chart. The thing like the 10 circles and the members sitting in those circles, succeeding circles, are relevant to every Advent. The dressing up around the perimeter represents, of course, the Advent at this particular time. But anyway, it's a fascinating piece of work. We've been trying to get the group in Hyderabad, if anybody's listening still, to reproduce this. Martin Cook had very carefully taken digital images from all different positions of the divine, of the 10 circles chart some years ago, and we had that on disc form, and it had been given to the Hyderabad people who said they would produce these charts. We wanted to make life-size charts that would be 8 feet high and 5 feet wide, and we wanted to make large poster-sized charts, which would be more practical for the average person to have. But it would be wonderful to have a life-size 10 circles chart for every major center of Baba in the world, and also for any individual who had a ceiling high enough in their home to be able to put it. You'd have to have at least, I would say, a 9-foot ceiling to be able to place this in your home, and a bare section of wall 5 feet wide. Next.
Yes, Peter, there was, in chronological order, there was another question in chat from Sue. Thanks for all your wonderful info, Peter. What do you think the purpose of closing the Samadhi at this time is about? And how will things unfold going forward?
Well, the purpose of closing the Samadhi is because they are complying with general rules and conditions in India, which is to really restrict possibility of infection. You know, first of all, going back to the origins of this coronavirus, people just didn't know a lot about it. It's something totally new, and the scientists did not know how it acts. They still are puzzled about how it's going to be acting and how it acts. And it has exposed a lot of the lack of knowledge of these things. So in lieu of that, generally, health authorities are erring on the side of caution. And that's why you have this. They didn't know how contagious this virus is. Now they know that generally it's not so contagious on solid objects as they thought it would be. That being said, a place like India is the last area where you would go to a place like Meher Baba Samadhi and expect social distancing to be followed, because it's just not. India is a place where people jam up against each other easily. It's a more difficult place. So the bottom line is simply, the explanation is that they had to comply with the government of India standards, and so this happened. And it's, again, a fascinating thing that people who had their particular personal habits of devotion are now forced to turn inward. And it's the same for Baba Samadhi. The first time in history, we say in the 51 years since he dropped his body, that his Samadhi has been closed to people. They can go there from a distance, but they're not even supposed to bow down at the threshold. This may change. We'll see as the months go by if scientists find out more information about the way this disease acts and how it is carried. But they're continuing that at this point. Okay.
Sue wanted to specify that she was wondering what Baba's purpose might be. But
Well, Baba's purpose might be, of course, as I say, we have him within. As he said, love God and find God within. Wherever we are, we have Baba. We like to go to the Samadhi, but if it's not possible and practical now, in the future, sometime it will be. It's okay. Next.
Dilshad had his hand up, but I have to find you now because your hand got dropped. Hang on a sec. Dilshad, you ready? And I have to find you alphabetically because... all right. So the next hand up was... Hunter, go ahead. Hunter? There you are.
Yes. Hi, Peter. Thank you for everything you're sharing today.
Hi, how are you guys doing?
Hey, we're doing well.
All right.
My question was, Baba was constantly inviting his lovers to step outside of the boxes that sort of govern their own sense of caste and creed and religion, and challenging the understanding that we walk through our world with around the things that divide us. And right now we live in a time where worldwide Baba seems to be wakening people up to systemic persecution and oppression of people of color, and really making people look at those boxes again. I was wondering if you could speak to how we as Baba community can use these times and the work Baba's doing in the world around race and and privilege and the things that divide us now.
Yes, I don't know if you must have joined recently, but we went over these issues a bit. But for us as Baba lovers, first of all, we realize that, as Baba said, the fault lies in our falsely identifying with the bodies. And to think, if you believe in reincarnation, that you're always going to be one sex, one race, one religion through your existence is a false concept. The whole purpose of the law of karma is to find balancing through reincarnation. Find the balance by experiencing the opposite. So, as Max said, his comment was, it was Bernice Ivory, not Beryl, but Bernice Ivory, who Baba made the comment to, that she was born black in this lifetime because she had been unkind. Baba told, when Erich told us the story, he said, Baba told me, don't be sharp, say it tactfully. So Erich said, Baba says, you were born black this birth because you had been unkind to blacks in the past life. And now you're experiencing a balance. So it goes on and on like that. So for us, there's not an issue as Baba lovers. We have to live the life, be the living proof that that attitude is nothing. You know, Baba actually said equality is based on a false premise. Why is that? He says, but because equality implies that we are not one. So even equality is based on a false premise. So for all the shouting about equality and demanding, it's still missing the point. Still missing the point of oneness. Oneness is always the essential point. So as Baba lovers, we should just live that life. Our lives should be that naturally. We don't have to make political statements. We just live that life. It's natural. Next question, please.
Well, I have Tina up for a second question.
Hi, Tina.
Hi. So, what do you see as the end game with all this coronavirus going on and a lot of people defying the recommendations? And
Yes, well, if their nature is to defy it and then they get ill, then it's happened to some people.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go back on the internet and saying it's not a joke. Well, okay, have it.
what do you think the Baba's end game with all this is?
Oh, it's just one. This virus is just one little blip. It's just one more factor. One more factor.
What do you mean?
You know, Baba told his lovers, just do your best. Lay back and observe these things and hang on tight with both hands to my Dhamma. All these things will happen. And remember, the one advantage we have is that through Baba's explanations, we can understand, but if not even understand, we have conviction in who he is, we'll take his word for it, that this is all illusion. It's all illusion. It's a passing show. It's a passing show. I remember Erich once making the comment, watching some conversations and whatnot, and saying to all of us, why do you people take this all so seriously? Passing show. Yes. There'll be more, probably worse things. And as Baba's brother Jal used to say, if we die together in Baba's love, what is there? Any other questions?
Yes, Daryl and Susan Smith. I'm not sure who had the question.
Oh, hi, Peter.
Hi, Daryl and Susan.
Hey, good to see everybody. This is a passion show. Very interesting. yeah, and I kind of forgot what I was going to say exactly about that, except for I think this, the effect of this, and getting deeper into Baba's words is making me realize anyway how uh, Baba is the reality. That, and on that note, I ran into something very amazing in Lord Mayhair. So it's not exactly a question, but I would like your comment on it. But it's with Krishna. It happened when Baba said there were two avatars. Are you familiar with this?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to share it with the community because it's so amazing. You know, first he's telling Krishna how he says, well, who am I? And he goes, well, you know, you're Baba. No, he goes, no, first I was Merwan, and then I was Sadhguru Meher Baba, and now I'm Avatar Meher Baba. And he goes, actually, there are two Meher Babas. And I'm just sharing this with other people who might not know. It's on, it's in Lord Mayhair, page 2818 in the hard copy. And he said, look, it's like the avatar actually is just a shadow. You see the shadow on the wall? Do you see me on the wall there? And he goes, no, Baba, it's just a wall. And he goes, no, look, I'm there. And he tweaks them and
Yes.
for a minute, Krishna sees Baba's image there, and he goes, you know, when I take physical form, it's my reflection that descends. That's the avatar. I do not really come. I am the beyond God. When I was Krishna, it was my reflection. I'm not that. I'm the beyond God. And then he talks about the, then he said, he wondered, well, I can go on, but that's the essence of it. Then he says, but we have your body, right? He goes, well, I should just say this because it's messing it up. So I'll just say, Krishna asked Baba something he had often wondered about. Baba, you had taken birth for the Hindus as Ram and Krishna, then for the Christians as Jesus Christ, after that as Muhammad, now you've come as Zoroastrian. Have you come only for the Parsis? And he goes, no, now I'm for all. This time I am the one for all, with only one teaching. And what is that? Love me. No prayer, no meditation, only love me. And Krishna says, but we have to have something to remember you by. And Baba said, well, you have me in the body. And Krishna says, well, what after you drop your body? And Baba says, that's why I say only love me. My prayer is that each and everything from top to bottom is contained in that prayer. Only love me. That prayer is enough for you. And so it's like when the avatar takes birth, he said it's like the reflection on the wall. And when he drops his body, the reflection disappears, but the wall, i.e. God, remains. It's eternal, like myself. That was like the most exciting thing I've read recently, and I just wanted to share.
Yeah, Baba would often remind people that he, of course, one of the last things he would repeat that night before he dropped his body. Remember, I am not this body. The eternal, ancient, original one. Quite different. But as he said, I just put this on like a quote so I can communicate with you. It's like that. Yes.
Ivy had a question. Ivy Dunaway, are you here?
Hi, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much, Peter. This is kind of an unusual question, but I was curious if you knew if Baba said anything about UFOs or extraterrestrials.
He did. You know how Baba said there were actually 18,000 planets in the physical universe that had life forms that were completely, fully advanced in consciousness. That is to say, they had human beings living on them. But considering the size of the universe, these planets are still astronomically divided by space. And Baba made the comment, you may think that these planets and those living on them are very far away, but actually they're very close, because people may reincarnate back and forth from different planets. So it's a question of inner links with people on those other planets. And of course, Baba said that many of the people incarnating on the earth now will be coming from those other planets. Because there are people who are taking advantage, not consciously necessarily, but through their interconnections, they're taking the opportunity to have a birth on earth during this very important avataric advent time. And that's why he said, one point Baba said, do your best to do nothing at all. The population will increase. The increase in population is an important factor in this intensification of karmic interaction, and most importantly, developing inner links so that people all over the universe will eventually be able to feel the effect of Baba's advent this time. But other things happened. I mean, you know, that booklet was published by, there was an old Baba lover from Calcutta area who was interested in this subject. And because he had helped Baba in the past and done things, Baba let him publish this book. He said, but don't publish it in India. They would be too much. Not in the Indian languages. You publish it in English. And that was the 64 questions booklet that was published towards the end of Baba's life. And in that, this man addresses the issue of UFOs, not from Baba, from another source. The problem with that booklet, it could have been more properly qualified. When somebody like a Ward Parks looks at a publication like this, he says, you didn't cite your sources here, and where is this coming from, and where, you know, and it's true. The habit in publications in India in those days was that it's kind of wide open. Copyright, you know, Baba said this, and well, okay. And things happen like that. By modern world standards, it's so fastidious that something like this could never be published fairly. But that being said, we're not discounting the source. It's just that these things may or may not be, but when people lose, to me, they lose perspective, because again, you're thinking of aliens and UFOs as being a more advanced form or an other form. Bob has explained that the human being is the fully advanced form in consciousness. And he explained that the problem with people in the other planets is that they cannot achieve a balance between heart and mind. Only on the spiritual archetypal planet, Earth, can that be achieved. So the real goal is to take birth here. That's the goal, to live in that atmosphere and get that experience of the possibility of balance of heart and mind. There have been experiences, people with UFOs. I don't say they don't exist. I don't claim to know exactly what they are and who they are, whether they are even from transporting from another planet per se, or whether they're traveling through an astral realm. We don't know, because they have more intelligence, again, but not the heart quality. So don't assume that because of superintelligence they have spiritual advancement. It's not the same at all. Not the same.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, Prakash, you had your hand up.
Jai Baba, Peter, and Jai
Hi,
Baba.
Prakash.
Hi. Thanks for your wonderful talk and answers to all the beautiful questions that Baba Roberts had. And I thought I'll share something very quickly. This happened during Northeast gathering when Don Euchre was also there. And we all know Don. He was one of the big active members in Northeast gatherings. And I just walked into the hall, and I probably had a face that looked like I'm concerned or something. So he looks at me and he tells me, "Hey, what's going on?" I said, "Nothing much." And then suddenly he piped, saying, "Look, Baba has said that his work is complete 100% to his satisfaction in 1968. What is there to worry?" And that's what he shared. So I thought I will just share that with everybody here. And I have a quick question. This is regarding you. Are you writing a book or something with all the information you have?
I'm not writing a book. I'm writing, as you know, I'm writing a script for a documentary series about Mehrabad, which is going to be maybe 20, 24 hours long. And I'm trying to keep it concise, but it's just the stories are too good. And in that, there will be many things that have been unpublished or are details that are unknown. Regarding Baba's work, yes, he completed it to his satisfaction, and yet he still, after his work, he stated his work was completed, he still stayed in his body for 6 months. So what was that? Baba said, he used the analogy, I'm like a mortally wounded commander on the battlefield, stumbling to certain death. But just before me, I see some ants on the ground. And out of compassion for these ants, I make an effort to stumble a few more steps so they don't fall on them and crush them. He said, and this is my condition now. So after his work was completed, he made that effort, stumbling 6 months more. And Erich would tell the story, and he clarified. He says, what is this? Who are these ants? Truth-loving humanity. Truth-loving humanity. What does that mean? These are people who aren't necessarily connected with the Master, who don't have some spiritual heritage carrying with them, but they have an affinity for the truth. And out of compassion for them, Baba extended the release of his work, because his work gets released when he drops his body. And this implies that the time for his manifestation was also extended. You see, that delay implies that compassionate delay in his manifestation that he referred to in 1955 also, so that humanity could not only better tolerate those changes, but a few more true people, the truth-loving humanity, with no necessary special connections, could also benefit from the avatar's manifestation. The work is completed. It was released. The other analogy Baba used was Ram's bow. Ram is pulling back the arrow. And the longer he waits, the further back he's pulling the arrow. When he drops his body, the arrow of his work is released. And immediately there are those who hear that release, and because of old connections, they respond. It's happening. So those people with past connections come to him as time goes by. But the world, in general, will not know until the arrow hits its mark. That is what he referred to as the breaking of his silence, which means the effect of the breaking of his silence. All the work, of course, was done while he was in his physical form. But again, it cannot be in our concept of a time paradigm. It has to be in his time, when the time is right. That being said, Baba said that it would happen within that period of 100 years after he drops his body. And part of the reason for that is that he fulfills the responsibility to the first circle members, the members of the first circle. All must get realization. All must get realization by the end of that period of grace. And since he said he's coming back in a 700-year period, that period of grace is 100 years. It has to do with the perfect ages, the 11 perfect ages between avataric advents. It's always the case like this. The first perfect age happens while he is still in the body. The second perfect age is also not so visible to the world in general. But by the third perfect age, they execute the manifestation of the avatar for that advent. And those will be many of the avatar's close circle members. He said as much. So if that makes sense to you, that's a theme that I've been on the last few years. Next question.
Well,
Any more?
your lovely wife has a question for you. Debbie?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Everybody can hear me? Yes. Peter, there was a comment on the chat that I wanted to bring up, but first I want to say that, you and I have had this conversation many times, that being aware of what Baba has said and told us doesn't mean that we're indifferent to today's conditions, doesn't mean that we don't take a stance, doesn't mean that we're not active in helping our fellow man. As we know, Baba said, spare no pains to help others. And some people have been bringing up racial and also historical things. And one thing that this woman said was, I hope that as a community, we do not feel that we lead cushy white American lives because we were slaves in a past life. And we don't offer such dogma to our Black friends. I've talked to you about this before when we talk about Jewish people and all the ones that suffered. And I like what you have said so far today, but I would like you to say a little more clarification on that, how we are not indifferent, and how as Baba lovers, we are to work in this, live in this world and interact with these social conditions as they are. And before we even got married, one thing you said to me, which I always loved, was Baba creates a situation and we play our part. So that's what I try to do. It's if I'm in somewhere and I see somebody that I should maybe say something about or to, that I don't keep silence. That's just one example. So I guess I'm trying to say is, how are we not indifferent? How do we interact and have compassion with all these things that are apparent in Baba's plan? Jai Baba.
Cushy white person's lives? I didn't get one of those. I don't know what you're talking about. Without going into the subject to waste time, I would say simply that it reminds me of a story. Adi Sr. was disgusted with Ahmed Nagar. And once he said to Baba, we should all get together as we do and just clean up the streets. Why don't we just clean it up, get this filth out of here and this trash out of here and clean it up? Baba said, good work. That's social work, though. It's not our work. It's good work. It's social work. That doesn't mean Baba lovers don't do social work. It means it's not our main purpose because it's still superficial. So that's why I say the reminder is follow the path of right action and right inaction. And Baba has prescribed all of these things. Shouting on a soapbox is not the thing. It's really making the effort. And we have to be the living examples. We have to be the living examples, not making a show, just being that, being that. It's the most important thing. Every day. And if you think it's easy because it's easy to make a show. We've got a lot of people who are making a show. Some people think it's all about making a show. With Mayor Baba, it is not about making a show at all. It's about being that, exercising that, making that effort. And we've learned that lesson from the Mandali. When we would see people even getting outraged and whatever, and the Mandali would just look at them and just be patient with Baba and soak it in. Remember the one important thing is that we are all one. That's it. We are all one. This is not somebody else. It is me. It is us. They are us. It's different. When you have that perspective, there is no racism and there is no, when you have that perspective that the other person is you, then there's no question of it. It's getting late. I wanted to just tell you a story I was interested in and finish by a little reading. I just went to this section in Baba's work in April 1947. Baba went to Madras, which is now Chennai, in South India, to meet a handful of his lovers there and give darshan at Meher Bhavan, their home there. I believe it was the evening of April 3rd. Baba was giving darshan to thousands of people. He hadn't been there in some years. So he was giving darshan to thousands of people. And a tall man, people weren't allowed to bow down, they were only allowed to come before Baba and do this. No touching him, no touching his feet. Baba would greet each one and they would each do this. So one tall man came by and passed. As he was passing, Baba clapped his hands. And he had one of the Mandali Adi, let's say. Baba says, he knows you. The man again bowed and turned and walked again. Again, Baba clapped. I know you. The next morning, Baba got in a car with some of the Mandali, and they drove through, one of the local Baba lovers was driving. They drove through the streets, Baba directing this driver where to go. And he directed the man to stop in front of a certain building. Baba got out of the car quickly, walked up the stairs to the upper floor, Mandali following him, stopped in front of a door. Knock on the door, Baba said. They knocked on the door. Continued knocking, no response. Baba said, break the door open, push it in. They pushed the door open. They go into this room, and in that room was the tall man who was roused out of his meditation. Pictures of Ram, Krishna, Buddha, and other saints, avatars on the wall. Baba went, there was one chair there, unoccupied. Baba went and sat immediately on that chair. And the man immediately rushed to Baba's feet, sobbing. After, Mandali were stunned, but on the other hand, they were used to this kind of thing with Baba occasionally. After the man composed himself again, he explained, for years I've been here praying that if the avatar was present on earth, he would come and sit in this chair. So today I'm convinced you are avatar. Baba said, nice. Ask anything you want. The man said, only Shanti. Baba said, look, ask for anything else. Don't ask for peace. Ask me for anything. He said, no, Baba, only Shanti. Baba, again, are you sure? Baba, I only long for Shanti. And Baba put his hand on the man's head. Now, I've heard 3 different endings to this story. One is that, and the man became dedicated to Baba and served his life, the rest of his life, in Baba's service. Hosham Barucha put it this way, carefully in this book, this old book. He put his head on Baba's feet and wept bitterly. Baba put his hand on the tall man's head and gave him Amar Shanti, eternal peace. The soul of the tall man found its haven in the infinite oversoul of beloved Baba. So he's tactfully saying that the man was liberated. Now, Erich, who was there, used to tell the story in the early days very rarely, and conceded that, yes, the man dropped dead, given liberation. These kind of sensational stories are things we didn't hear much in the age of the Mandali. And there was a reason. There was a reason. In the age of the Mandali, especially, they were so careful about the atmosphere around Mera to protect Mera from the world coming in a rush. So this was part of the group of stories that Erich stopped telling in the 70s. Every once in a while, Erich would tell a story, and I'm sure there would be some feedback, and you'd never hear it again. There were a few stories like that in the early days. This was one of them. Baba himself, in 1954, after returning to Mehrabad from Sakori with the Western men, stopped in Rahuri and gave this explanation and confiscated some of the literature that these men had received in Sakori, telling him, this isn't for you. He told a story of a man named Narasimha Swami, he said, who came to him, and he sent him to Apasi Maharaj, and he ended up writing this history of Apasi Maharaj. He said it was half okay and half inaccurate madness. The tendency is for sensationalism, to talk up miracles. And where other masters and their disciples would talk up miracles, we have seen the proof, I have personally, I will tell you, from scouring the early diaries, that many miraculous things happened, and we were never informed of them, though they are recorded in the diaries of the day. And why is that? Because Baba was not pleased with this kind of talk. And the Mandali knew it, so they wouldn't tell us these things, because they knew it would eventually come out. In that talk, on the way back to Sakori that day in 1954, Baba said, and I'm sure eventually all of this will happen. He explained about the atmosphere in Shirdi and how that had first happened there, and how all of these people were now coming for miracles. And this was only 54. Really, it happened only recently in the last 40 years. But Baba said, and unfortunately, I'm sure it will eventually happen around our atmosphere. But for now, he didn't want that. During the Mandali era, we were exposed to the atmosphere of love. Not miracle mongering. And you know, in India, unfortunately, I see it. There's a tendency right now in India you see a lot more of this as new people are coming. It's their habit. It's their habit. They've had this from other places, and they come there and start rumors. You go to 7 doonies in a row and your wish will be fulfilled, and all this kind of crap. It's just unfortunate. But I love the atmosphere of Baba lovers. because of the greatest iconoclast in the world. You'll be at the Samadhi and somebody will say, look at the way that guy's bowing down. What the hell is he trying to do? Start a religion here? You don't have to worry about the world of Baba lovers. Now, I got into this period, April 1954, because there was a nice message that Baba gave the next day, and I thought it was also relevant to this age, this specific time, not this age. So the next day, which was Good Friday, April 4th, Baba gave this message to a group of untouchable laborers. This is in South India, which is traditionally quite an orthodox place. To believe today that birth and profession are necessarily the basis of any difference between man and man is to insist upon living in the past and remaining dead to the present. Cleanliness of mind and body, which is practical spirituality, has never been and can never be the monopoly of any one particular class or creed. It should be aspired to by everyone and can be acquired by anyone, man or woman. To maintain this purity in the face of rising opposition from circumstances entails suffering. The spiritual status of any country or people on this globe is in direct proportion to its potentiality to suffer. Suffering should be intelligent and far-reaching. When a country or a people develop a spiritual outlook and life, it automatically raises its potentiality to suffer. India is primarily a land of spirituality, but the surface differences have, for a time, blurred its ultimate destiny. Selfishness, multiplied by population, results in wars, exploitation, persecution, and poverty. Selflessness, multiplied by population, brings about peace and plenty. All the modern fads that are stalking the world today in the guise of politics, economics, materialism, communalism, nationalism, and socialism have to be judged on the criteria of selfishness or selflessness. I'll repeat that. Have to be judged on the criteria of selfishness or selflessness. Whether you are religiously suppressed or politically oppressed, whether you are economically exploited or industrially sweated, the suffering that results should determine your spiritual claims and status. Man-made differences, like all other things made by man, take no time to change with the changing times. A great changeover is near at hand. Rights must be restored and will be restored, but responsibilities have also to be shouldered. It is indeed great to be a man, but it is far greater to be man to man. Irrespective of their birth labels and belief tables, my blessings to all those who feel themselves to be oppressed, depressed, and suppressed from any cause whatsoever. Nice being with you all. Jai Baba.
Baba, thank you so much.
You're most welcome.
Jai Mai Baba.
I've allowed people to unmute themselves if they want to thank Peter. That'd be great.
Thank you, Peter. Jai Mai Baba Peter, it's Master Nodi from Hyderabad.
Thank you, Baba Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
Baba Peter.
From Bombay.
Thank you, Peter.
Hey, Mayor Baba.
Peter.
Baba.
Thank you,
Thank
Peter.
you so much.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Debbie.
Baba Peter.
Thank you, Debbie.
Jai Mai Baba Peter,
Jai
it's
Baba.
Master Nodi from
Hey,
Hyderabad.
Mayor Baba.
Thank you so
Hey,
much.
Baba,
Peter.
all around
Thank
the
you.
world.
Yeah.
Mayor Baba to everybody.
Baba.
Amen, Baba.
Hey, Baba.
Thank you,
Baba
Baba.
Peter.
Thank you,
It's a Nori
Peter.
from Hyderabad.
Oh, Edward.